Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Well, we're very pleased to have back with us Michael Liebowitz. This is his second appearance. We'll get into some of his background, and you may just want to view that episode. But on his last appearance, one thing that came up was this issue of confusion within objectivism. And I think it's a huge issue. It's got a lot of implications. So we wanted to bring him back to kind of flesh that issue out a little more.
Well, thanks for having me back, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So, confusion has been a persistent theme in objectivism. I think you'd said that no one was ever going to confuse your views with Joe Biden, but they could confuse your views with Trump. But in some, because and we'll get to clips, I've got Yaron Brook saying basically the same thing. We have some other clips from Rucka as well. But I think that sometimes this confusion theme has been used almost to shun our most natural allies all across the liberty movement, and thus to remain just, unable to form even rational alliances.
I actually agree with you, Scott. And I want to clarify kind of what I mean by confusion. And I don't think it's a black and white issue. I think many issues in life are black and white. This one, I don't. What I meant by confusion is not somebody, say, that voted for Trump because they feel it's an obligation to vote and the alternative was simply unpalatable to them. I personally wouldn't have made that choice. I wouldn't have voted for anybody, but I certainly don't begrudge somebody who feels that that's the right way to go. Now, there's a difference between that person and the person who defends Trump, defends not only what he says, but defends what he does and defends the positions he takes. Like, if you want to support Trump and say, okay, but he's not a capitalist, he's just the lesser of two evils, that's one thing. But when you say he is a capitalist and he's a proponent of the Constitution, it's simply not true. He's not those things. And that's ultimately what I meant.
Right. But I mean, the lesser of two evils implies that he's a little more on the capitalist spectrum than Biden, for example. I mean, he at least wanted to cut regulations. I'm not defending him just to defend him, but, just like Rand in the money speech said to the love of money is the root of evil. It's not bad just to know a thing and love it. It's like, I'm willing to defend why I supported Trump over Hillary or Biden in 2016 or 2020. I'm not even backing Trump this time. I'm all in on DeSantis. So, to me, I think I explained this to you a little bit earlier that my principle's just, I want a fighter and someone that is going, the lesser of two evils of the actual fighters that can at least be a check on this woke march through the institutions.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. And this is part of the difficulty with these discussions with all of us is, what do you mean about when you say I'm all in on DeSantis?
It means I've done an assessment of the potential candidates that have a realistic chance of winning. I've lived in Florida, I live in Florida, and I've watched DeSantis's policies actually make other governors be braver about ending some of these COVID restrictions. And, what he's done just in terms of being willing to at least push back on, DEI and ESG and, saying that they're not going to support legislation or, they're not going to support any pensions that have those types of companies in them. And that's actually making companies like Vanguard now pull back and say, they're pulling back from DEI and ESG investing. So, I credit that to the DeSantis effect. They don't want to get the Disney treatment. So, I'm of course I'm open to context if he somehow gets bad or if some sort of better candidate comes along, but I just don't see it.
Okay, so when I hear you say you're all in on DeSantis, this is what I'm thinking you mean. I'm thinking you mean that he's somebody that may not be in line with all of your principles, but mostly is. Now, if I take Ron DeSantis and I line him up with the views of Ayn Rand, and I'm not deifying Rand, she's the example. This is, the Ayn Rand fan club. I think that their views are vastly different on a lot of issues, in a lot of issues that matter.
I mean, she backed Nixon.
Well, that's the thing. She did, but she would have and that's where I agree with you. She did. I wouldn't have, but she backed Nixon, but she would have never said that Nixon was philosophically or politically in line with her. She would have basically said exactly what you said, in that he's the lesser of two evils. And that's why she said anybody who would have voted for Hospers, I forget. She said if Hospers took one vote away from Nixon, it would be a travesty or some such thing as that. But I really want to get to something that I think is very vital in all of this, and it goes beyond politics to culture. You were talking about wokeism, and you talked about how Trump pushes back against wokeism. And here's where I think my views would be vastly different from the two of yours, is I don't think that wokeism or CRT can be battled with Trumpism. I think it ends up just being a food fight of irrationalism. CRT is ultimately a philosophy, and I think it needs to be defeated with a philosophy, not with a lot
That's
of
great for anyone that's willing to get out in the world and fight. What I hear from too many of these liberty groups is, oh, everyone else is too unprincipled. We better just stay here on the sidelines. I mean, they don't say that explicitly, but that's the overall message. And so you do have to make choices among the people that are going to be setting policy.
But I think that CRT can be attacked from the top to a certain degree. What a Trump could do is inspire the thinkers or intellectuals to start coming up with arguments against CRT. And so he'll be the leader. He sees the overall picture of how things are getting worse. And then he'll point to CRT and say, look at that, that's the enemy. And then the people below him, the thinkers who kind of generally agree with his attitude, will start thinking about it and writing papers and articles, studying it. And, he'll get the ball rolling. You need some sort of leader to do that, to motivate people to focus on an issue. And so, yeah, you're right. Things aren't going to radically change with CRT because we have Trump in office, but things will start to change, I think.
Well, CRT is ultimately, descends from critical theory. I think it was I can't remember the school now, the Frankfurt School, the Theodore Adorno, and I forgot the other, Max Hornberger,
all
maybe,
those
or
guys,
something.
yeah.
But it reminds me a lot of postmodernism. It probably fits within that group. And Stephen Hicks, who from the Atlas Society, wrote a masterful critique of postmodernism. That's the type of philosophical argument I think that needs to be made against this stuff. Ultimately, I think it's a very weak philosophy. CRT is a dishonest philosophy. I mean, they talk about how individual rights is a baseless concept, but they want to use it to further their objectives. That's just manipulation and dishonesty. That stuff is easily crushed, in my opinion, if you're just honest. And I don't see Trump as an honest broker. And I don't think he makes the argument to go against it, other than to say, these people are trying to take what you have. And I just don't think that cuts it.
It's not about Trump. It's about stopping it in the first place. That's another one of these excuses that I hear. Oh, woke is so easy to take care of. Or some people say it's on its last legs. Woke is peaked. It's nihilistic and can't ultimately win, or whatever the excuse is not to have to do anything about it. But, at some point, it is actually changing corporate cultures and how they hire and just the implicit things that they know about, who they need to promote to make sure that they're meeting whatever unspoken criteria is out there. And it does affect the culture. It does affect how people's attitudes. I think that part of it, the confusion issue, is a type of second-handedness, because it's like, we're so worried that someone's going to confuse Trump's capitalism with our capitalism, that and it's like, you've got this left here that's just, they're willing to they call us capitalists or Republicans as almost this technique to get us on the defensive to say, no, we're not those evil Republicans. We're not those racists, but they think it anyway, just because we're for capitalism. They're confusing on purpose, and us bending over backwards to try to help them understand when they're not even being honest brokers is a waste of moral energy.
Yeah, you've said an awful lot. So I let me respond. It may take me a couple minutes. First of all, I'm not saying that wokeism or CRT are on their last leg. I don't. I think that they're making large inroads into our culture. What I think is that it ultimately has a glass jaw if you have a robust philosophical argument against it. That's what I mean when I say that it should be easy to defeat, only if the effort is actually put forward honestly and rationally. Secondly, I think there are a lot of people out there. You said it's not about Trump, but I come across people over and over again who defend Trump no matter what. It's not even about the policies. It's about him and his character and his personality. And I think that's wretched. Then you said that there's people who say, oh, no, we're not those evil Republicans. They put us on the defensive. But it seems to me it's those Republicans who are the very ones who go on the defensive. As soon as they got accused of wanting to cut Social Security, no, not us, not us. That's Republicans that do that, and that's part of the problem.
Left, so will the GOP.
And they have. And then you said it's a type of second-handedness to be worrying about confusion. But I have to disagree. Ultimately, the whole point, the point of your show, the point of me making my arguments, I assume the point of you making your arguments is to persuade people so that we can end up living in the type of society that we want to live in. I'm pretty confident that the three of us all could agree on ultimately the type of society that we wish to live in, but it's about how to get there. And when you talk about how to get there, it does matter what people in the society, what people in the culture think. Ultimately, I don't think we're ever going to bring over your leftist. What I'm talking about is people who are uninitiated in philosophy, don't know much about politics, and they're just coming into it, and they hear about capitalism, and then they hear Trump talking about tariffs and about salvaging Social Security and having family leave programs. And if they think that that is capitalism, they're vastly mistaken.
Biden calls himself a capitalist. And Liz Warren calls herself a capitalist.
Let me jump in because I think the issue is about people presenting themselves as a capitalist, and that is a problem. But I think the solution is not to distance ourselves from other people who call themselves capitalists, but to join them and distinguish ourselves within that community as another type of capitalism. Because we're not gonna convince everybody that Trump is not a capitalist or DeSantis is not a capitalist. They're a type of capitalist. They're the traditional type of religious capitalist. But we are the secular capitalists. And so we need to jump in that arena, side with them in one regard, in their fight against the left, but then kind of enter a debate with them about what the proper form of capitalism should be. And that's my main reason for advocating that we join the Republican Party or conservatives in general to become that voice, to become a bigger voice within the right sphere and, try to convince them of our arguments and what type of capitalists we should become.
Okay, can we define capitalism? I just want to make sure that we're all discussing the same thing as we're having this talk.
Well, I agree with Rand to an extent. So she defines capitalism as the social system based on the principle of individual rights, where all property is private. I disagree with the last part. I think there is some instances where you can have public property, and that doesn't involve things like eminent domain. But I do agree with the general, the genus of that definition, which is that it's based on individual rights and the protection of those rights. So I think we can agree on that with the conservatives or the Republicans, but they'll disagree on what is the basis for those rights, which is why we have the abortion debate. They think rights come from some mystical God or something like that, and we try to come up with a natural basis for rights. So that's the argument we need to be having with them while we're getting rid of the left, because the left doesn't even base their political system on rights. They base it on the society, what the state wants. It's all about statism. So
Okay, I want to comment on the definition of capitalism and how I don't believe that the definition of capitalism that you laid out or the dictionary definition are conducive with Trump or Ron DeSantis. And here's why. The dictionary doesn't define it the way Rand does. The dictionary, the last time I looked, says that capitalism just is private ownership of the means of production. It's basically a private society. So how you can say that you can have public ownership within a system of private ownership?
You can have City Hall.
Yeah, but you can hold on, but you can have City Hall, but City Hall is then not part of a capitalist institution. It might be part of a society that is mixed, but it's certainly not capitalistic. And somebody that's embracing that, they're embracing is a mixed economy. And if you're talking about like Trump, for instance, Trump supported the Kelo decision here in Connecticut, where I live, where they allowed, the Supreme Court actually allowed private property to be taken for private use. And Trump was for that. There's no way that's a type of capitalism. That's statism, pure and simple. As it was when he wanted to force Apple.
Better than Hillary or Biden. That's my point.
I'm not disagreeing with you about that, Scott. I'm disagreeing with the point that Bill just made, or William. I'm sorry if you prefer William, but that he just made, that they're a type of capitalist and there's different type of capitalists. I think we run a grave error if we allow that and if we enter into that type of discussion.
Well,
I think we need
fighting the dictionary at this point.
I'm fighting reality.
Have to get the dictionary.
Hold on. But words mean things,
right? But you're saying you're not even accepting the dictionary, so it's much more confusion than just Trump.
No, hold on. I'm absolutely accepting the dictionary. The dictionary says capitalism is private ownership of the means of production. Therefore, anything that's not private ownership isn't capitalism. And if you're supporting state ownership of property, that aspect of your view is not capitalism. There's no getting around it. I don't see how you can.
Well, I'd like to, William, if you want to answer that and clarify your position, that's fine. But I do want to get to this clip of Rucka lamenting. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me just jump in. So basically, you're right. The dictionary, my dictionary at least, I'll read it. The definition of capitalism is an economic system in which the means of production and distribution are privately or corporately owned, and development is proportionate to the accumulation and reinvestment of profits gained in a free market. So yeah, you're right that it's the dictionary says that capitalism is based on private property and distribution. So, but I'm saying we don't have to agree with the dictionary.
Well, that could be confused with corporatism.
Well,
what's that?
That could be confused with corporatism. But
Rand didn't agree with that definition. She based it on the principle of individual rights. So there's something more fundamental in objectivism regarding capitalism, and that's
even if you extend to that, though, William. Even if you take Rand's definition, which I'm not quibbling with, I actually think it's implied by the dictionary definition. But even if you accept hers, the idea of a welfare state, which Trump supports, it's not conducive.
Not as much as the Democrats.
No, not as much. But here's the thing.
It matters.
It does matter, Scott. But you're ascribing an argument to me that I'm not making. I'm not sitting here saying that Donald Trump is not better than Democrats.
To it by saying he's, status.
Well, hold on. The thing was about confusion. And my concern is that when Trump says he's a capitalist, or Republicans are held out to be capitalists, and we don't differentiate ourselves from them, people that are uninitiated into this debate who are just getting involved are going to think that's capitalism. I'm not talking about picking the lesser of two evils. I'm not talking about making a vote. I'm talking about not challenging that aspect of things, not differentiating and saying these people are not capitalists. That's all I'm talking about.
I would like to play this clip of Rucka lamenting Ben Shapiro being seen as a champion for capitalism as well because of the confusion. But by the end, I think he inadvertently admits to the real issue at play.
Ben Shapiro, whose worldview I know all too well, when I see him as being seen as kind of an anti-social justice hero and a champion of capitalism, I'm worried. I hope I don't need to be as worried as I am, but I think it's not so much the left that made me want to speak out. It really is kind of what I see as the menu that people are presented with. and that objectivism is not on that menu. It made me really want to speak out. So it's people like Dennis Prager and Jordan Peterson that I kind of see as they're getting minds and hearts that should be ours.
Hearts and minds that should be ours. So it's a type of intellectual competition. And I believe that that is why, Rand was sometimes harshest on conservatives and libertarians.
Well, let me just point out that Rucka is making a decent point. You want to contrast yourself with other people who label themselves similarly. So if Shapiro is saying he's a capitalist and you disagree and you say he's not really a capitalist, that's fine. I don't have a problem with debating other people who enjoy Rand. Shapiro clearly enjoys Rand and has had objectivists on his show.
He's producing an Atlas Shrugged series for Daily Wire.
Yeah, that's the sort of person you want to collaborate with and then have the side disagreements with. You generally agree with them that the left needs to go. The left is a big problem. They're not even in the sphere of capitalism. They're just complete commies or socialists or pseudo socialists. They are the true enemy. And so we need to work with people who have something in common with us, even if it's just a love for Ayn Rand. Even Trump, acknowledged that his favorite book was The Fountainhead, or he really enjoyed Howard Roark. And maybe he was BSing, but he's expressed that sentiment publicly. So I take him for face value on that. I don't see why he would say something like that and have it be a lie. I think he genuinely appreciates Rand, and a lot of people on the right genuinely appreciate her works, and they want to engage. Clearly, they want to engage in a civil way with objectivists, and we should take them up on that and kind of join them in their battle with the left and stop harping on them for being, just not the perfect capitalist. We can nudge them
believing in God.
We can nudge them in the right direction and say, this is our view, like give a positive view to them and say, this is how we see capitalism, and let them absorb that.
So they don't confuse us for jerks.
Yeah. I have no issue with engaging anybody, including, by the way, leftists. And I think that look, Rand went on Phil Donahue. She went on Johnny Carson. She was interviewed by Mike Wallace. She did other interviews as well. And she was also friends with Ludwig von Mises. Now, obviously, he's not a leftist, but he certainly wasn't an objectivist either. And she recommended his books constantly. So I'm not opposed to engaging people. The only thing I'm saying is that we ought to differentiate ourselves when it's necessary and when it's appropriate. And when it comes to, I'm not even focusing on your run-of-the-mill everyday Reagan conservative. I'm talking about this Trump movement, the Trump dynamic. That's what I'm most concerned about being confused with. I personally think that the Libertarian Party would be a better sort of vehicle for objectivist ideas. Now, I know most objectivists disagree with that. They oh no, you can't be libertarians. Someone even told me the other day that to become a libertarian in the Libertarian Party sense would be to sell out because of their position on intellectual property. But that's one issue, and it's not even in the national platform of the Libertarian Party. So some aspects of what you're saying, guys, I do sympathize with the view. I think we do a disservice to dissociate ourselves from everybody who doesn't agree with us on every little thing. But at the same time, I believe there are times when we need to differentiate ourselves from others. And in the case of the Trump movement, I think that's one such case.
Let me ask you a question. How much differentiation do you need to do? Because I think at a certain point, it's beating a dead horse. Shapiro doesn't need you to differentiate yourself from from other capitalists. He knows the difference between a Trump and a Yaron Brook. He's had Yaron Brook on his show. And so you have to assume that Shapiro's audience, is at least his devoted or serious audience, also knows the difference, because Shapiro has made that clear and Yaron Brook has gone on, and they know the difference.
Okay.
And so I think we're at the point in history. Maybe it was an issue when Rand was alive and the Libertarian Party was just starting, and she was concerned that there would be this confusion. But now, I mean, decades later, I think history has told that story, and anyone worth their salt can research it on Google within 5 minutes and figure out the difference. I think we're beating a dead horse. We don't need to focus on clarification between the different types of capitalists. You just need to go forward with your positive message and collaborate with people who have something in common with you, even if it's just a general respect for individual rights.
Okay, well, I don't what you said. How much does Ben Shapiro need me to clarify? I'm not interested in clarifying anything with Ben Shapiro or for Ben Shapiro. I think he's a smart guy. What I'm talking about, and I've said it several times, is people that are uninitiated into philosophy in politics, people that might be just coming along, people that might be open to persuasion. Those are the people that I'm talking about. And I got to disagree that it's been clarified. I mean, just the Tea Party, I'll never forget as long as I live, somebody from the Tea Party saying, keep your government hands off my Medicare. I mean, if you can make that type of a statement, you clearly haven't had things clarified for you. And today, where are the people out there who are advocating abolishing the minimum wage or getting rid of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, or ending the war on drugs? They're not in the Republican Party, aside from perhaps Rand Paul and maybe some other lesser known guys, but by and large, no one in the Republican Party is saying those things.
As
and
the
those are
left
important.
keeps taking cultural control, the Overton window, if you will, shifts, and what you can even advocate changes.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the Overton window, because I actually posted this morning on Facebook that I plan on smashing the Overton window. And I think that that's what needs to be done. When I watch these shows, news shows, political shows, whatever, they confine the debate within narrow parameters that are acceptable to all the parties, but their parameters simply aren't acceptable to me. And I think it's time that we expand those parameters vastly.
I think what you're discussing, though, is actually not clarification or differentiation. You're discussing persuasion. I mean, these people, I believe most of the people you're talking about, even people who are recently initiated, let's say, I don't think you need to spend a lot of time convincing the uninitiated of the difference. You just need to tell them to Google the difference between the different capitalists. And
no one's coming in tabula rasa at that point in their life anyway. They've been bombarded with all these slogans, you know, even up to the time they're normally would have read Rand for the first time. I think people want to see a type of moral bravery in pushing back against the dominant cultural forces.
Okay,
yeah,
well,
when you talk about people who haven't embraced objectivist version of capitalism or individual rights, and they go off and they're capitalists and they still support socialist elements, I think that's because they've rejected the argument that objectivists made. You know, they're not unaware of it, they've just rejected it and embraced a more religion-based or something else-based form of it. And so that's about persuasion. We need to go in and try to persuade them with better arguments if we think they're convinced, they can be convinced.
Okay, so you said a second ago that I'm not talking about clarification, I'm talking about persuasion. What I'm actually talking about is clarification for the sake of persuasion, to persuade people that are either on the fence or may be attracted to capitalism but find some problems with it, or people who are totally unfamiliar with it. And to say that everybody would just know could just find out by a Google search, I think that's belied by the facts. William, I mean, you're a guy who studies this stuff. You know a lot about it. And not 15 minutes ago, you made a statement that you can have state-owned property as a part of capitalism, but you cannot. You can have them in the same society, but those would not be a part of capitalism. And if somebody that's been studying these issues for years can still make that error, what about someone who's just coming into the fold or just starting to learn about politics? Those are the people I think it needs to be clarified for.
There's going to be mistakes along the way, and you can try to.
And that's why you clarify things, because there's mistakes.
You can kind of micromanage this confusion to where you're not even just letting people breathe and think for themselves, and that itself can be kind of a turnoff to some new people.
Well, it's
so I think
it's simply a matter. Hold on one second. I got to say this because it's burning me right now. I'm not talking about micromanaging anything. It's a simple matter of not giving an all-out endorsement to Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and their ilk. That's
it's
all
not
I'm
all
saying.
out. You know, when I say I'm all in, like I said, I'm willing to consider context, but yes, I consider the left a bigger threat, and that's probably not going to change between now and election day of 2024.
And that's fine, but that's not an all-out endorsement of DeSantis and his program. You just said because the left is a threat, and you think he's the lesser of two evils. But that's not what's been said. That's not what a lot of people say. A lot of people defend Trump. They give him their all-out endorsement. They say he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. That should not be done by anybody who's serious about advocating capitalism
Again,
or
let me
objectivism
say
in total,
something
for that
here.
matter.
Let me say that you have a very hard definition of capitalism, like
It's not
Rand.
my definition. I didn't make it up.
You have the hard definition like Rand's and the dictionary, and at least my dictionary. I know there's different definitions for capitalism, and you can probably find one out there. Maybe I have the American Heritage College, but maybe in the Webster's it's different. And so what are you going to say when someone brings up a different definition of capitalism that doesn't rely upon all property being private?
Well,
You know,
all I can say to that is this. I've been studying capitalism in these subjects for 20 plus years. I've read economists from Adam Smith and Ricardo to Mill to Marx onto the Austrian school, Milton Friedman and Keynes. And I've never seen a definition of capitalism in the dictionary or otherwise that said there can be state-owned property and that's capitalism. I've never seen it anywhere.
I mean, has there ever been an actual society where there's been no state-owned property?
No, and Rand makes that case, and that's why her book was called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, because it was unknown. It's never actually
but that
occurred.
is actually causing more confusion because some people believe we've actually had a capitalist society in history.
Yes, which is why clarification is important, Scott. Thank you. People actually believe that was capitalism when it wasn't. It approached it in the 19th century. It came closer to approaching capitalism than ever before, but it certainly did not reach it. And that's why
you're acting like no objectivists have tried to make this clarification.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that at all. Plenty of objectivists has. I didn't make up the idea on my own.
Right,
I got it from reading Objectivists.
But you're making it seem like if only it was clear enough, people would understand. And I think sometimes there's actually more than that going on, you know, as evidenced by the lack of cultural penetration over the last 40 years. But I think, you know, just to one of your earlier points about, you know, that no one could mistake Ayn Rand as a leftist, that you kind of anticipated one of my clips. Yaron was trying to get his audience to promote his article in a progressive publication, IAI, the Institute of Art and Ideas.
Okay.
This group has had Noam Chomsky speak. They've had Kimberly Crenshaw on the board, who's often called the mother of CRT.
Yeah.
So his rationale for sanctioning this progressive organization that he said he disagreed with 99% of the time was because of the lack of confusion with a leftist organization.
But the principle is, I do not want objectivism to be confused by any other ideology. I don't want it to be assumed that objectivists are conservatives, that objectivists think religion is okay. We don't. We think it's unbelievably damaging and horrific. We don't want to be viewed as leftist, but we're never going to be viewed as leftist. Like if I go on a leftist show, nobody is going to confuse me with a leftist, because Ayn Rand and everybody knows I'm not. But there are lots of people who confuse Ayn Rand as being conservative or libertarian. So going on a conservative or libertarian show requires much more value than going on a leftist show, because everybody knows I'm not a leftist. There'll never be a confusion over there.
First of all, let me say that he's just wrong. People do confuse him for a leftist. There are a lot of people who call him a bleftivist as a smear. Now, I don't call him that. I don't want to call him that. But you know, there's a reason why people are calling him that. And I think it's because he does adopt a lot of the leftist propaganda from socialist media, like CNN or MSNBC or NPR. He has a lot of their talking points. And so in some regards, he sounds like the leftist media. And he's called that. He's called him a bleftivist. And he's just ignoring that.
Right. He's asserting that, he says at one point, no honest person could consider him a leftist. I don't necessarily consider him a leftist. I see it as just on some level, he's accepted that the left has been winning for the last 100 years. They're going to win. He also values their, the symphony that he sees as like a blue trait. And so he's just trying to make terms with them.
Okay. Because I don't like to defend people I don't know, and I don't know the full context, and I don't know all their views. But since he's saying something similar to me, I'm going to speculate. But let me be clear that that's exactly what I'm doing, is speculating on his meaning. People that are calling him an objectivist are people within the Ayn Rand fold.
Right.
I believe what he's talking about there are people are the uninitiated, like what I said. That's who he's talking about. Isn't going to confuse him for being a leftist. You're talking about an internecine food fight where people who basically have the same views are saying, no, he's a leftist. He's not really an objectivist, which to me is no different than him saying to somebody, you're not really an objectivist because you went and talked to the laissez-faire books club. That's what I take those types of terms to mean. I don't take that to mean legitimate confusion from people who aren't aware of the issues.
I think there's a segment of the right who are not objectivists who have rejected him. And he used to go on.
I don't disagree with that. I'm talking about
radio
people
shows and conservative news programs, and he doesn't get those gigs anymore because I think he sounds too much like the left.
He may. I'm not familiar enough with him. I've only read one book that he's written, and I thought it was a wonderful book, by the way. It was called Free Market Revolution. But I haven't been listening to his show. I haven't had access to it until the last 3 months since I've been out of prison. And quite frankly, my time is pretty full. I can't listen to everything I'd want. So I can't really comment on what you're talking about in relation to him. I can only comment on what I just heard.
Well, I do have another clip. Yaron asserted that. What's that?
Before we move on, let me just say one other thing, because I do want to defend Yaron a little bit, because I can sympathize with him sounding like the left. Because if I were to go on a conservative program and start railing against religion and abortion and immigration, or supporting open borders immigration, I would sound like a leftist too. But I recognize that when I'm talking to the right, the conservatives, I want to appeal to them. I don't want to put them off. I want them to listen to me. Part of persuading people is getting them to listen to your more important points. You don't want to drown your more important points in these unnecessary distractions or details. We can get to that later once we've established a relationship of common principles and civil discussion. But I think what Yaron does a lot is he goes on these programs. He has like 3 minutes on the radio or 3 minutes on TV, and he feels like he's got to attack the right. He's got to go after the right instead of just pointing out the common ground he has with them and joining them in a fight that they have with the left.
It's a fine line between not confusing and kind of a virtue signaling to prove to the left, hey, we're not those bad guys.
Well, there's a lot going on in these things. And ultimately, I agree with William that we ought not to be arguing over trifles with people, that we should basically team up with people where appropriate when they're furthering our views. My problem with the right in this country presently, however, is I don't view the welfare state as small things that we differ over. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I don't view the war on drugs, which is a huge assault on individual rights. I don't see that as a small issue. You're locking people up for recreational activities that affect nobody but themselves. That's not a small thing to dispute.
Put your cards on the table. If you prefer the Democrats to win,
I don't prefer either. See, that's the thing is you want to switch me into this or lock me into a binary and say, well, if I'm not a Republican,
elections go in this country.
Well, it's how elections go until it changes. It used to be that it was only the Federalists in the Democrats or the Republicans that became the Democrats. But then that changed. Then there were the Whigs, but then that changed. So yes, as of now, that's the case, but it doesn't have to be. And I refuse to accept that.
Yeah, well, I'm willing to pivot as things change as well. My point that I was getting to in this clip I wanted to play is I recently asked Yaron a question, because he said he was unsure about this Memphis police killing by 5 black police officers. He was unsure if it was racism. And he, at the very least, seems to have many of the woke talking points down pat, like internalized systems of a racist attitude.
All right, Scott asked, why are you unsure if racism was involved? Wouldn't that imply systemic racism present? Do you see America as systemic racist? I see as America as significantly more racist than I think many of you do. I think people are racist in this country. I think the attitudes towards immigration by certainly a segment of the American population is driven by racism. I think subtle forms. Nobody admits to being a racist, or very few people other than Nick Fuentes actually admit. Look how popular Nick Fuentes is. I think a lot of people have the general attitude that you could, for example, cops, whether white or black, I think you could that you could beat up a black guy that you stop in a traffic cop, but probably not a white guy, that you couldn't get away with it with a white guy. I think they've internalized basically the systems racist attitude. I think if you look at how the establishment basically responds to when a white goes missing, or versus a black goes missing, or a white child goes missing, a black child goes missing, the media and so on. I think there are many subtle ways in which generally we are racist.
So I see that as a type of, you can try to say, oh, he's just speaking honest, but I mean, he's regurgitating woke premises. And it's funny because one of my rubs on Yaron is that he doesn't like to admit that he's wrong, but he actually ends up changing it a little bit to say that, oh, it's just his audience that's much more racist than they admit.
Well, first of all, I got an issue with him saying we are racist. That's the first thing.
What's this we shit, white man?
Yeah, what's this we? Because you're by we, are you including me? Because I'm not. So I don't know what he means by that. And I have a sort of a more of an inside view of this, given my history with the police, in that I think that a lot of times people ascribe things to race that have to do with power. I've known plenty of cops that I got along wonderfully with growing up. Plenty of cops tried to help me. They tried to steer me in the right direction when I was screwing up. But I've also been abused by cops, and I've seen cops abuse other people, and they were white people getting abused because they were the people coming in contact with the police. So I'm very skeptical to ascribe motive. It doesn't mean the motive isn't there, but it comes down to what Rand called the psychologizing. That I don't need to know a person's motive to know that the behavior is wrong. And I think we're on dangerous ground when we start saying something is because of race, when really we have no idea why the behavior is taking place.
Yeah, I guess
we don't have to know their motive, but we might need to know their value systems, because everybody has different values. Some values are more prioritized and necessary for them than others. So I agree. We don't, in some instances, a police beating an unarmed guy is just wrong, or beating someone who's just standing there is wrong. Even if he ran away or was trying to flee and they caught him, well, they caught him, it's time to not beat him. So I think to some degree it is about power. And I definitely disagree with Yaron about, this widespread racism. I think he speaks in generalities a lot, and I consider it mostly just BSing, because he's got to speak a lot, on his show. He's got to fill the hour or whatever, so he's just speaking off the cuff. and rarely from detailed notes. So I think if you were to press him on this issue, he would get into some particulars and kind of agree with you here and there.
Well, he
But when
did. I
he
mean,
gets-
he's suggesting the media's racist when they actually go in these days with like some woke narrative and even how to choose the stories they report on.
Yeah, the problem is when he's speaking off the cuff and giving you his genuine opinions, it sounds a lot like CNN. So it's a troubling thing, you know, to hear him speak like that and not know what he really believes, because it's hard to
Yeah,
it's
I
hard to
heard that and
communicate him.
thought,
Go ahead.
you know, how many more woke premises does Yaron have to repeat before one could honestly start confusing him with a lefty?
Maybe two more.
Are we actually trying to quantify this?
Well, I'm just saying, you know, because that it's just it's a naked assertion to just say no one could ever accuse me of a leftist, and that's why I get to hold them to a lower standard for, you know, when I get to talk to them, because I guess, you know, that's who he's reaching out to on some level for them to be publishing his writings. But there is just one more clip that I do want to play.
Well, let me just say it's not about, to address Michael's point, it's not about just about quantity of leftist, you know, arguments or points. It's also about the quality. Like, which points is he making? Are they fundamental or critical? Is it like more important than like 5 other minor points? So here he's talking about a very fundamental aspect of wokeism, which is this inherent racism, or this widespread
Right. That we're all
systemic
racist
racism.
and just not admitting it.
That's like the essential part, or one of the essential parts of the CRT woke culture. So it's a very disturbing thing to hear him talking like that.
Maybe Kimberly Crenshaw helped educate him, but this is the last clip I wanted to play, and it was Yaron was asked about whether Ayn Rand should have said more about redlining, and he takes issue with the term should, but he ultimately does say that he wishes she would have said more.
I guess I wish she had spoken up more against the racism of the 1950s and 60s. I think it was an important issue to make the individualist case on. Of course, she did in her famous essay on racism, and she did in other places, but I think more could have been done to make the argument against racism, and I would have liked that, but I don't know that she should have. That is way too strong of a statement for me to make about Ayn Rand. I would have liked.
So that is another thing that another leftist premise is getting us to admit that we're somehow racially insensitive. And I mean, he's kind of saying that about Rand. I don't think it's fair to judge any historical standards, figures by today's standards. I mean, you just end up calling Aristotle a transphobe.
Well, I don't know about not judging them by today's standards, but certainly there's been people throughout history during their times who judged things as reprehensible that were widely accepted. And Rand certainly saw far ahead of her time. She was a smart woman. That essay on racism is absolutely brilliant. So during the 1950s and 60s, I don't think it was hidden from sight that there was a whole lot of racism going on in this country. Now, whether she should or shouldn't have spoken out about it, she was speaking out about a lot more fundamental things. And ultimately, if one adopted her philosophy, racism's gone. And I actually had a debate with a Black activist friend of mine in prison who asked me, he said, Liebowitz, he said, Mike, you distrust government so much, but yet you won't admit that they're racist. And I said, well, ultimately, I don't have to know that they're racist to know that they're incompetent and corrupt. If you get rid of the incompetence and the corruption, then it's irrelevant if they're racist. And I think it's the same thing with Rand. If somebody accepts her philosophy of reason, racism's gone. So I don't know that she had to address it specifically.
I agree with that. I think that Rand was primarily a philosopher and a novelist. And she wasn't concerned with the nitty gritty details of institutional racism. She saw the broad picture and she was trying to make a broader point, a more philosophical point. And that's what she explained in her essay. So what the problem I have with Yaron here is that he's not recognizing this. He's not recognizing Rand's context or personal interests and what she contributed. He's saying, I agree, I would have liked to have seen her make a more detailed argument. Well, that's kind of what leftists do. They ignore the context, they ignore the broad personal issues, and they attack based on their subjective desires, like personal desires, what they want. And that's the problem with them attacking historical figures, like the founders of the country. And they don't appreciate the context they were in. They just attack them from today's standards. And so they tear down their statues and everything. And so I have a problem with Yaron's like negative orientation towards this question. I think if he focused on the positive, he would realize what Rand was trying to do and appreciate that she did have a full argument for the theme she was trying to bring forward.
I've thought for a while that, Yaron had been just ignoring or evading that the left thinks Rand's a bigot, but I mean, he's at least aware of it enough to kind of say he wished she would have said more, maybe in hopes that his new lefty friends at IAI, will think that he's not a bigot himself. Thoughts?
I don't even know what that organization is, Scott. You got to remember, I was in prison for 25 years.
No, it's just, I mean, this was the organization that he was talking about wanting to become part of, and that he, it was okay for him to do because no one could confuse him with a lefty.
Oh. Well, I did more sort of basic to his point that he feels that he would have liked for her to speak out more. Now, I've done a lot of interviews over the last 4 years, and I've had a lot of people say to me that I should have said this or I should have said that, which comes down to what William said about their subjective preference, what's important to them. The bottom line is, if I'm interviewed for 20 minutes or a half hour, there's a limited amount of things I can say. And in life in general, time is limited. You can't address every single thing on the planet. You're necessarily limited. And Rand narrowed her sort of activities to addressing the things that she felt were important. And by the way, the things she addressed were important: individual rights, a philosophy of reason, capitalism. Those things are of overwhelming importance. And again, if her philosophy was widely adopted, then racism would have been gone. And I think she's well aware of that.
Sure. She talked about capitalism as being the solution to racism, or someone in Objectivism has, I know. But yeah, I just, to me, it's, you talk about confusion. This man is chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute that, at least implicitly speaks in her name. And for him to be, I think, putting it out there that he wished she would have been more racially sensitive, I think undermines Objectivism with, those trying to say, oh, this isn't a place where we're going to virtue signal or be part of moral guilt to try to, fit in the culture.
This goes to the problem with him being the chairman of ARI and also having this podcast where he answers questions about Objectivism. So a lot of people confuse his statements with statements from ARI. He's not representing ARI when he's on his podcast. So I think we should appreciate that. We should just take his opinions for his own opinion as his own opinions. And he's not speaking on behalf of like Objectivism or ARI. He's speaking on behalf of himself, and he makes that clear. So I do give him a point for making it clear that he doesn't have anything to say on what she should have done, because I think bottom line is he recognizes that there's this historical context, and it's not his place to say what she should have done.
Why isn't it his place? I thought every is implies an ought.
Well, he can give his opinion on what he would have liked, which is what I'm not faulting him for giving that opinion. I'm saying he doesn't appreciate like her time and her interests, and his orientation isn't towards, her values. It's about what he wants, and so even in that regard, the orientation is a little off. Like it shouldn't be about what he wanted. The question was, should Rand have, discussed it more? And so he should have just said, I have no opinion on that. Or he could have given an answer like I gave, which is that, she gave and Michael gave, that she has this broad philosophical view on racism, and she did contribute a lot to the argument. So he could have given that positive orientation. Instead, he went to the negative one.
Yeah, I don't believe Ayn Rand could be confused with a leftist, but I don't think he is Ayn Rand. And for the record, I'm not confusing him with a leftist. I'm confusing him with someone I see as sometimes caving to the left while speaking as a representative of her, which is really, I will say also, confusion is one of the rationalizations against David Kelly and the Atlas Society, for example. They're using, because they're using the term objectivism, so now we have to approve of them and their definition. That happens with people that use the term capitalist too.
Yeah, he does make that argument as well. He doesn't like David Kelly's group because now he's got to explain what an objectivist is. So but I think this comes down to, perhaps, and I don't want to speculate too much, but perhaps a sort of insecurity in his own position or his own ability to express himself, because someone who's secure in their own position doesn't give much regard to other people who are in their orbit and also calling themselves similar names. Like, I don't go around trying to clarify what a real man is. I think I'm a man, but other people say they're a real man. I don't spend my time trying to differentiate myself from real men. But he's trying to differentiate himself from fake objectivists, and he's saying he's the real objectivist. So that seems like he's over concerned with that problem. I don't think it's a terrible, I don't think it's a big problem. I think that it's only a real concern within the objectivist orbit, and other people outside of objectivism who are the uninitiated, and you're trying to convince them of things. They don't really care about our petty squabbles within the movement. They don't even know what an objectivist is. So why is he trying to differentiate himself from other objectivists? He just needs to talk to them and tell them what kind of objectivist he is, and that should be sufficient.
This question was actually asked the other day in one of the Ayn Rand chat rooms that I go into. I don't remember which one, but it was, what counts or who's an objectivist? And my answer is I never call myself an objectivist, partly because, as far as I know, Ayn Rand wanted people to call themselves students of objectivism and not objectivists. Plus, it's because there's all this, no, you're not a real objectivist, or he's not a real objectivist. I consider myself a disciple of Ayn Rand. I agree with her fundamentals. I think she was a brilliant philosopher, the best I've ever read. And I think she had a lot to say. I don't think she was perfect. I think she personally says that people are not omniscient. Well, if people are not omniscient, that would have to apply to herself. That means she was fallible. I think there's things that she said that were, quite frankly, wrong and mistaken. Fundamentally, I think she's spot on, and I think we have a lot to learn from her, and I think society would be a lot better if her philosophy was incorporated into our institutions.
Yeah, I just, someone said the other day, I'm not sure, look, Rand is very positive. It's a great view of life, but she also was willing to fight and call people out when, she thought they were morally evil. And I do think that's important, but, you can create confusion when you do that among people that may be your potential allies.
I don't agree with that, Scott.
Well, good. I like to think we've cleared some things up on the confusion issue.
Well, and for the record, by and large, I consider the two of you to be allies. I don't, we can disagree about this stuff, and I think these conversations are important. But I think if the three of us had the choice to implement our ideal society, I think the society that we would implement would be pretty similar. I really do. I think probably on far, far more than where we would differ.
Absolutely. I think, we'll even let you bring your libertarian friends to hang out.
All right. That's great.
Well, good. I think this has been a good conversation. We talked about a lot of good concepts. Any final thoughts from either of you?
Just thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. I mean, I've been out of prison for 3 months. I was there for 25 years, and there's a lot of people who wouldn't accept me, wouldn't allow me to speak my mind, and you two allow me to, and I really appreciate it.
You're quickly becoming my favorite ex-con.
All right, I hope so.
William, any final thoughts?
I'd just like to thank Michael for coming on again. I really enjoy these conversations / debates. So I think we are allies in the objectivist movement in general, or in the Rand fan movement, if you will. I think just like there is a lot of different types of objectivists who believe this or that and have minor differences, that's the same thing with the Republican Party or the conservative movement. I think there are different types of conservatives, different types of capitalists, different types of Republicans, and we might not agree on all the details or even certain fundamentals, but I think we can agree that socialism is bad and the left represents socialism, and we should all gang together and kick their asses. So I think that's the primary issue here, is how do we convince people to join this battle against the left and stop squabbling for just maybe a few decades or maybe a few years, however long it takes, to get the left out of the picture, so we can have the more important debates like what is capitalism and what is a life, an individual life, and have the abortion debate and all these things.
I'm even open to bringing honest lefties along, like Barry Weiss and people like that.
Sure. I personally think we should close with William's comment. We need to kick socialist ass. That's a perfect place to close.
There's no confusion there. Great. Well,
No,
that's fantastic. Thanks again, Michael. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig, and we will see you next time.